Oh.
You want those
Where you
kids?
from?
Sure, that's not good.
How you doing?
Oh, thank you. Single spaced.
Pinned you in. Thank you. Good. Take your time. Six over. Get closer. All right, I'd like to call to order the Torrington Board of Education special meeting. The purpose of the meeting is a response to recent allegations against the Torrington Board of Education. For Monday, November 5th, 2012, 6 o'clock at Pigeon Avenue. Roll call, please.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mrs. Capabianca? Here. Mr. Cavanero?
Here.
Mrs. Honan here. Mr. Kisco?
Here.
Mr. Marola?
Here.
Mr. Nargi?
Here.
Mr. Rivero?
Here.
Mr. Tebow?
Here.
Mr. Traub?
Here.
Mrs. Batchelder? Here. Mrs. DeMonico? Here. Mr. Jocelyn?
Here.
Mrs. Clarko?
Here.
Mayor Bingham? That's it.
Good. Meeting was called in response to several articles that have recently been run in our local newspaper and heavily responded to by the population. The recent allegation was that I don't understand the position of chair and what the rights and responsibilities of that position are. I would like to take exception to that and just simply state that I do understand my position as chair. Number one, my position as chair is not to speak as the board. I speak for the board. When the board has made a vote and made a full decision, it is my responsibility to communicate that decision to the community. That is my goal, that is my responsibility. It is also my responsibility, if 3 or more members of the board would like to have a special meeting, it's my responsibility to call that special meeting. It is not my responsibility to decide what sections of these bylaws we're going to follow when. It's my job to follow them all. And if they change in the future, then I'm to represent the bylaws as they sit at that time. It's not my place to make the bylaws. Other than that, my main purpose, and I believe the purpose of this entire board, is the 5,000 plus students, the faculty, the administration, and the taxpayers of Torrington. I think that is our responsibility. And I take that very seriously. I don't take it as a joke, as has been implied. I do like to communicate in a lighthearted manner because I don't think arguing gets us anywhere. If that's misconstrued as a lack of seriousness for my position, I don't apologize for the way I communicate, but that's not my goal, I guess is the right word. Other than that, that's my opening statement. I understand that, does anybody have any comments on the recent allegations?
More of a procedural aspect. We call a special meeting in response to recent allegations against the Board of Education.
Yes.
I'm not positive that just because there's some articles in a newspaper, those are the types of allegations the board would meet to, in a formal setting, to act upon. I think for allegations to be brought against the Board of Education, they should be done in the manner in which we conduct our meetings. They have an opportunity to make out, for us to respond to an allegation. I think it has to come in a formal setting, such as at a board meeting, where they would have an opportunity either to get on the agenda or at the public comment section. But I don't know if it's just, I mean, I'm just looking at it. I'm not really positive we respond in this formal manner when you just hear comments out there, be it by a newspaper editor or the general public. That's the procedural aspect. I don't know if anybody wants a comment of why they think we should be formally responding to just newspaper articles.
Well, as a procedural aspect, as chair, I don't get the right to decide. If 3 or 4 board members want to have a meeting, I have to schedule a meeting. So that is why the meeting was scheduled.
Right.
Okay? As far as, we have been repeatedly for the last 5 days asked for a response. More so I've been asked for a response. I can't make a response to these statements because I would be responding for you. And it's not my job to respond for you. Once you as a board come to a conclusion of how you want to respond, then it's my obligation to respond based on what the findings is. Again, whether I'm in agreement with your findings or not in agreement with your findings, it's my job to communicate those. So the meeting is here because I was asked to have a meeting.
Right.
We have the meeting. I have been repeatedly asked by the paper, in fact called out today by the paper, to respond to them.
And I
But
get,
I can't, okay?
and I guess what I'm saying is I think if this meeting is to go ahead, I think whoever is making these allegations should do it in a formal setting. Whoever you think is making allegations, put their hands up, say, these are the allegations that I would like to allege against the Board of Education, and take the minutes of those allegations, and then have the board respond. I'm just a little uncomfortable that we're just responding to newspaper articles and what people are saying in the newspaper. It's not really anything but what people want to say. It's not really a formal allegation. That's just an opinion.
All right. Anyone else have a take on this?
I would like to move that the board consider if they want to make a response to the allegations in the form of a formal letter to the editor of all the newspapers that locally cover us, or if we would prefer to make a press release. So, the letter that we're proposing that we submit as a letter to the editor, we've handed out to everyone. But we believe this issue is a board issue. It is not just an issue of the chairman of the board. It is an issue of us as an entire board and how we operate. So I would like to discuss putting forward a letter to the editor from the Torrington Board of Education with our position.
So you're moving that this letter be submitted letter to the editor?
Yes.
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Okay, discussion on
Okay, I'll go back to, again, procedural aspect. What has been introduced to us as a document that we're actually responding to? I mean, need to have some procedure here where we formally receive a document before we respond to it. I mean, we all read articles, but need to have that actual, what do you actually allege? What document, what story? Well, I understand you got it there, but I'm talking about what are you formally going to introduce to the board that we will review and then discuss, and then potentially do a letter if we decide to do a letter. I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's basically,
No, I mean, I know what we all read, but where's the introduction of that evidence? Where's the articles that you want to introduce that we would have as a file, as we would document that this is what we're doing tonight? We're responding to what specific article authored by what specific person?
if you want, we can print them off and,
Yeah, I mean, print them off and submit them as part of the meeting.
okay?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Recording this. Is there a chance, Cheryl, can we get Deborah back in here for recording purposes and have someone else make the print?
Yeah.
Please?
I can go.
Thank you.
getting on the camera.
Oh, yeah.
That guy.
Yeah, oh
I didn't
yeah.
see you there. I walked right by, I'm sorry. I was fighting with John for space.
Mr. Chair, just point of order.
Yes.
Can we have people in the public in attendance identify themselves so we know who we are talking to? Who's also, can you just ask them?
Certainly. We'll start over in the corner.
I'm Sam Slavy, I'm just here as a member of the public observer.
Hi, Sam Slade.
Kathy Peterson, parent.
Matt Lorenzo.
Steve Mishna.
Nikki, Tree 11 from the Register.
Jason Sears, Register Citizen.
Thank you. While they're making those copies, the only reason that this is being done in a formal setting is due to FOI regulations that we can't even have an email chain to discuss it without that being considered a formal meeting. As we found at the board retreat that we had, we don't have the luxury of a casual conversation about it. So we have to, the PTOC thing that happened a few months ago ended up in the same format after we went to the FOI workshop, I guess, for lack of a better word, at City Hall, where it told us that we could not conduct a meeting of just the executive group and the PTO because that would be classified as a meeting and had to be public and had to be posted. And so that, once we became aware of that any meeting, even a small meeting of just to have a discussion, had to be an FOI reported, documented meeting, that we have had to change to this format for everything.
Are we back in?
Yes, we are back.
Formally
Yes,
in the meeting?
we were when they did the introduction.
Then, yeah, I would just like to say that I do think it's appropriate, I do think it's absolutely appropriate that this board meet as a board to address the articles that have been printed in the paper. I mean, in my 10 years serving on this board and site council, I've never seen such a, you know, almost personal attack against a board member, individual board member. And I think that that chairman of this, chairman of this board certainly deserves for the full board to sit and discuss those charges against him that have been made public. And I do think it's in the best interest of the Board of Education to, at least in one place, in one time, come to some kind of common response to all of these charges that, you know, we can all feel comfortable with as just to basically try to frame this discussion by according to what we perceive as the correct way to approach the business of running the Torrington Public School System. And I think, you know, the fact that it has been raised to such a high decibel level within our town demands that we as a board sit down together and do this as a board. So I think this is justified, and I think hopefully it'll be productive.
Okay,
Can someone else go?
oh, yeah.
That's right. Danny's asking.
Mr. Chairman and fellow members of the board, I unfortunately have another commitment this evening, so I will have to leave in about 4 minutes to be able to make that commitment. Hopefully the articles come back in time for Mr. Nargi's perusal and verification. I have been out of town for the last week, so I'm just getting caught up to speed on the articles involved. I perused them over the last 2 hours. I've only been in the state for the last 3. So it's been very interesting. With this whole situation, unfortunately, the only thought process that comes to mind based off what I've seen in the articles is yellow journalism. They are taking something that was an internal matter of the board moving forward and a discussion that should have happened among 10 members of the elected population to represent the population. And they've turned it into the ultimate in a witch hunt. I sit as one of 10 voices. We vote as 10 people and in 10 individuals. Once the vote is taken, we speak as one voice, whatever direction that is. Whether I agree, whether somebody else agrees, whether we all disagree, we speak as one voice. I support the board in whatever direction they decide to go moving forward this evening. Whatever the majority vote is, that is the way I will support. I would encourage everybody to remember, we are a democratic republic. We speak individually, we vote as a majority, and then we stand behind the vote. That is the way it is supposed to work. We are not 10 individuals on 10 separate missions going our own way. We are 10 people voicing opinions, thinking for ourselves in the best possible way to help and support the people in the community we represent. And then as we move forward, we do it together, not individually. I thank everyone for their time, and I do apologize for having to run.
Okay, thank you for coming. Carl, did you have anything to add? You want to wait for the articles, or?
No, I read them. No, my sentiments echo that of Dan as well. I think, having read over the letter and whatnot, I think it's an appropriate response. I do, like I said, agree with the sentiment that we're all entitled to our own individual opinion, but the ability of the board to speak as one voice for the school system moving forward is vital that we get that message out there and why that reasoning is there. Just on my own personal note, I thought that an opinion piece being published on the front page of the paper was highly inappropriate, just for the fact that the public is entitled to know what they need in the form of an unbiased article, and to run that on the front page, I thought, and disparage the board was not the journalism that the public deserves. So.
I share Andrew's concern that we are dignifying what are essentially rants by having this meeting. But I think that those rants have been elevated to the point where they warrant a response.
I agree with John, and well, actually, Elliot. I believe it's elevated to a level that it warrants a response, and it's our obligation to give that response.
We have more copies coming. We have some in here.
I know. I don't have a hat on and everything. Chris? Sorry to stop. I got sidetracked.
I agree with the general consensus around the table. I'd also like to say that individually, I have never felt bullied by the chair. I don't think I've ever been forced to participate in bullying directed by the chair. I think throwing that phrase around in the article is irresponsible. And bullying is a big problem. I don't perceive this as that. I have an issue with that. But otherwise, I think it's important just so we can move forward and get down to the actual business that we have to attend to, which is the children and taxpayers, teachers, etc. We don't have to devote any more time to it's become a divisive issue.
Yeah, I think it's important that we move forward as a board. I suppose a response is definitely in order. This has had a front page news for a while now. I'm not going to vote in favor of this, as this is my first viewing of it. I would like to be able to read it and adjust it. To sort of go along with what Mr. Nargi was talking about, I understand that there's a lot of stuff that's been written in the paper, but what specific allegations are we addressing?
I believe the specific allegations we're addressing is the procedural aspects of how the Board of Education operates and the specific responsibilities of the chairman of the Board of Education, since I believe that the chairman has been under attack in these last several days. So that's what I believe we're responding to, our procedural aspects and the roles of the chairman of the Board of Education.
Yes, sir.
And this is where I have the problem, which is we have these bylaws, and then we have a statement of integrity in which all board members must operate by. And it goes, board members must, and this is on the first page of our bylaws, it goes, integrity is first, discerning what is right and what is wrong. Second, acting upon what you have discerned, even at a personal cost. And third, saying openly that you are acting on your understanding of right and wrong. To me, it seems like it's stating that as a board member, when you have an opinion on something, it's your ethical duty to publicly state to the public what your feelings are on any given issue. That being said, we have the specific bylaw, which is number 11, recognize the importance of speaking with a single voice to the community, deferring all requests or inquiries for public comments on issues to the board chair, unless authorized by the board chair to speak on behalf of the board on that particular issue. I think that's where this board needs to have a board discussion on how we want to weigh the importance, which, I mean, we're all in agreement that the board chair on certain issues will speak for the entire board. But I just don't believe that that means each individual board member should lose his rights to speak his opinion on any issue that is pertinent to the Board of Education. And it's not just a general belief on one's ability to speak on issues which affect the public, but I believe our statement of integrity mandates that in good conscience, when you have an issue that you think is important, that you're allowed to express your opinion without first having to put it before the chairman and asking the chairman's permission to speak on that issue.
Well, John jumped first, he was louder, so I can.
Your point earlier, Andrew, though, was that we have a chance to express all these opinions in the board meetings. And this is, in fact, where you can say whatever you want, basically unbridled. So I would say that once you have that opportunity to do so outside of a board meeting forum is maybe a little problematic for the way it looks like we conduct our business on the outside.
Can I just call a point of order? I feel that if any of the board members have issues with the bylaws, the way we have them now, that any member at any time can bring up for a bylaw revision. And maybe what comes out of this is that we have a good, serious look at our bylaws. But I believe this special meeting is purely for the point of, do we want to respond to the allegations that were put forth in the newspaper via the method of a letter to the editor. Bylaw issues are not part of this meeting, but any board member can request that we review the bylaws at any time.
Well, the bylaws are,
If I can, I'll pull a point of order on that as well. This letter does address a bylaw issue.
I
It
think,
quotes the bylaws.
I think the only point is, I don't think anyone here on the board is going to argue that there are conflicting opinions within the bylaws. I don't think anybody's, there are multiple views, because the bylaws were edited, if you go to the end of them, I think 9 times. And it appears stuff was always added to the end. As a board added something, so, you know, things were added, not necessarily cleaning up verbiage from an earlier discussion or whatever. So as far as looking into the bylaws, it is on the policy committee's radar for this school calendar year to visit the bylaws and review them and suggest change. And that, you know, that is already on the board, you know, docket to do that. Fiona's point is that we're here to talk about these allegations, not get lost into a debate over what should or shouldn't be changed in the bylaws, because I think that everyone will agree that there is potential conflict in there, and that we should bring it up at a future, you know, at the policy committee meeting, then to the full board. It's already scheduled. It's not something that it's not a result of this meeting. It's actually already on the policy committee agenda for the year. So we're going to do that. And it is definitely an important aspect.
and then just go on to, now that I see what you're actually stating is the evidence, I have a real problem with your including the comment section of the Torrington Registers, whatever it's called. I mean, these are statements by taxpayer, jarhead. We don't want to get started in taking any of that any more or less serious than what any reasonable person would take anything said by jarhead and taxpayer. It's just not worthy of a board meeting to respond to. I mean, I didn't realize that was gonna be part of, I mean, I thought you were gonna stick much more precisely.
I think when you print it, it prints what
So what are we responding to? Responding just to this Ricky Campbell's article, or are we responding to
There's
10 comments?
There's 3 articles.
Okay.
But I think the comment section is again to the point we've been on, that this is what it engenders. This is what articles like this engender.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna-
Okay.
I would like to say, I agree, of all the positions, I agree, I think mostly with Chris's. This has proven to be very divisive. I would like to also say that after having been chair for 5 years in extremely trying times, there was always, in my mind, to stick to the process of the board. And I got slammed in the paper a number of times. I got slammed in the, I had literally people in the, maybe you remember, Matt, somebody actually during the O'Brien case suggested that somebody get a gun and shoot me. And at some point, I think it's important to get the facts about our chairman correct. And I believe those facts are, like Mr. Rivero has said, I have not witnessed. I don't know private conversations you had with other board members, but in all of my dealings with this current chairman, my experience has been he has always acted very honorably in terms of meeting the expectations of the position, that he has dealt with me, and in my experience, and from what I've seen from the public meeting, has dealt with every board member extremely fairly. He has bent over backwards to solicit opinions, to get people involved in discussions, even when they don't agree with him. He and I have disagreed on many, many occasions, and he has given me every opportunity to advocate for my position during the appropriate meetings. So I do take offense with the general tone of many of these articles that are trying to portray him as, in fact, somehow acting outside of the normal realm of what a chairman is supposed to do. I think he does an extremely good job of precisely that, representing the board, doing the work of the board, keeping our agendas moving forward in what is hopefully a productive way. And based on that, I think there needs to be a statement of our position relative to how we are going about doing our business. I think we need to state that. People will attack, if this gets into the paper, people will attack this, and they'll dice it and slice it and parse it and pick it out. And that's it. At that point, I say, we're done with it. If this, or some version of this is what we believe, that's what we believe. And then I think it's important for this board, much like when I was chair, to then turn its attention toward looking at the problems of this school district, which are many and varied, and keeping in mind that, what as this letter alludes to, we have the business of trying to conduct a very public, what am I trying to say here? Enterprise, while at the same time protecting and keeping private so much of that information that drives our decision making. It drives us crazy, we all know that. Having to, not being able to talk about in public the things that we know exist. And yet, every single meeting, every single one of these board members is acutely aware of how easily we can be sued and our taxpayers raked over the coals by various individuals who are looking, who would love to be able to sue once again the Torrington Board of Education. And so we have to suck it up, and we have to not talk about a lot of things that could be and should be, and we would love to talk about, but cannot. And it is trying. And there's no more trying position than being a volunteer chairman of the Board of Education. Because not only does the buck stop there, but everything unpleasant stops there. And there is very little recourse, and I would hope that this board supports him during this time.
I would like to just touch on something Paul said. It's in the explanation that we want to put out. What differs this board from any other elected board in this city is that the majority of the information that is processed by this Torrington School District is confidential information. If you go to planning and zoning, any application submitted to planning and zoning is 100% public. When the application comes in, anybody can go down and read it. It's a free and accessible to everyone. The main reason in talking to past chairmen in this position, Paul included, is the reason that bylaw was written was not written to silence anyone's First Amendment right. It was written to reduce the potential liability to the school system by just simply what government is made of is checks and balances. It was just to get, if someone wants to put something out there, get another set of eyes to look at it, to avert a potential, and I'm sure unintentional, breach of confidentiality or child protection, or for that matter, negotiation protection or staff protection, or it's evaluative to the point that one of the bargaining units turns around and files a suit against us. That's, from what it's been explained to me by 3 past chairs, that was the intent of that bylaw, was to simply create a check and balance to protect the taxpayers, because when it comes to our kids, let's face it, we're all ruthless. If you go after our kids, we go after you. If any parent in this city feels that their privacy has been breached, there's no bounds. They're going to seek whatever they can get, and they're going to go after blood because they want this, the protection of their child. And that's really, it's not implied that any of the members of this board don't understand that. It could be a simple identification of a situation which doesn't have a name but is specific enough to identify a student. And that's really what the intent was behind number 11, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I think you're.
Yeah, 11.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
That was the intent behind that was not necessarily to say you can't do it, it was to just protect the overall taxpayers. Because let's face it, math, reading, writing, science, they're gonna happen. If $2, $4, $6, $8, $10 million gets awarded to somebody, we still are going to teach math, science. It's going to, in the long run, hit the taxpayers. It has to, because we can't just shut down a school because there was an error of a breach of secrecy, and we can't just cut $10 million from our budget. It just isn't, it's not a possibility. So it would have to be borne by the taxpayers. And that was the intent of that level from what I've gathered from the people that I spoke to that were on the board at the time that that bylaw was added. It was not in the original, it was added after, and in one of the revisions. So, yes.
I have no problem with approximately 47 of the lines in this letter, but I'm going to refuse to vote in favor of this because at the end of the day, the only lines that I think are important are recently several articles and letters to the Register question these methods, accusing the board chairman of trying to silence individual board members. We say they are wrong. I'm not saying there's any malice by the chairman, by the board, in what they were attempting to do with Mr. Morella. But at the end of the day, that's exactly what they wanted to do.
Hold on. You cannot discuss the happenings of an executive session in public.
No, I'm reading here.
You're pulling into it a personal connotation. There's no mention of Mr. Morola's name in this letter. You are implying, and you are trying to read into this, something that's not on that sheet of paper.
Yeah, but all the articles were in response.
But our response is not about a person or something that happened in executive session. Robert's Rules of Order and state law dictate that if it happened in executive session, Andrew, it stays in executive session.
Well, then how does the Register, then why are we here? Because how did the Register citizen know that we were talking about Mr. Morola's?
Because someone from the board told the registered citizen we were talking about Mr. Morola.
So, I guess the next question is, once it becomes known.
No. It's still willful violation of an executive order. And yes, I did get my law degree this weekend. I talked to Jessica Ritter before we came here to discuss this meeting. And the one adamant rule that came out of it was that it is not we cannot violate what happened in that executive session, and we cannot discuss what happened in that executive session, and that any response that the board put together will be a benign response, not identifying any one person or anyone's conduct. This is simply a statement of a board position on an article. If the article or the papers wanted to assume, or if they made an assumption, that does not mean that we carry on that assumption.
Well, if the articles aren't talking about specifically what we did as a board, which we didn't do anything as a board, because the only way the board could actually do anything is not to go into executive session, but be in open session and make a motion to actually act as a board. You as the board chairman have no right to do anything without the board first voting to tell you what the board wants to do.
That's exactly why we're here, is that the paper does not understand that.
Okay.
Or the author of the articles does not understand it.
Well, if it's your own letter that says accusing the board chairman of trying to silence.
It's not my letter.
Whose letter is it?
See, again,
I
as chairman of the board.
said it's our board's letter.
You actually said it's my letter.
Well, okay. The board's attempted letter to get this approved states accusing the board chairman of trying to silence individual board members. They are wrong. Who's making that determination that the newspaper's wrong in accusing the board chairman of trying to silence individual board members?
Did the board vote to silence a board member? Yes or no? Did the board vote to silence any board member?
I guess we,
Did we?
no, we didn't.
Then that's a false accusation right there. There was no vote There was no open session discussion. There was no, as it's quoted in their policy, written or directed, given.
I think that you have a certain understanding of what goes on in executive session, but I think the individual who is in executive session, in which we went into executive session to discuss.
Point of order. This
No,
is
no, if
not
that
a-
person wants to come out after executive session and discuss what took place, I believe he has a right to do that. It pertains to him. He's not, just because we go into executive session, doesn't mean we all of a sudden deny an individual the right to come out and talk about what transpired to him or her.
According to our legal counsel.
Well,
I'm gonna give you the answer. You asked the question, I'm gonna give you the answer. According to our legal counsel, that is not true. That once it happens in executive session, it was not voted to be an open session before. If it went into executive session, it stays in executive session. Now, if the individual involved in it were to talk about it outside of executive session, that still does not give this board the right to speak about that executive session. If the person, and it's gonna be John Q. Public, if John Q. Public was talked about in executive session, and John Q. Public came out, sorry, I didn't mean to pick John, I just thought of that. If that guy speaks about it, it's his prerogative to speak. If he spoke about it out of executive session, who's he gonna sue, himself? That does not relieve the legal responsibility. It's not just a get out of jail free card. Okay, now we can all talk about it. This board is still bound by Connecticut state statute to not discuss the happenings of an executive session.
It certainly would have been good if our board attorney was here tonight, and I know you're
Well,
always
as I've been
complaining.
accused of spending too much money on
I'm
this
not accusing
situation.
you of
No, you're not. That guy sitting over there did. So if you're accusing me of spending too much money on this situation, it was bad enough to spend 1 hour on the phone with them today discussing the possible outcomes of this. When I discussed it with them, I did not have this letter. I simply discussed the agenda and the rules by which this meeting has to go by. And the number one rule that this meeting has to go by is there's no discussion of that executive session because that's an executive session, or who was involved in it or not involved in it. You know, again, if the paper got information, that's the paper's right as an investigative journalist. They got that information. However they got it, they got it. But we can't sit here at this meeting and discuss it.
Well, then I guess we really shouldn't be sitting here, period, because the substance of what this is all about is whether or not you particularly, the board in general, had tried to silence an individual board member. And if you're saying we are not here, we cannot discuss whether or not that took place, then I guess we shouldn't have the meeting, period.
But we are discussing whether it took place. Did we take a vote to silence a member?
No, but
Then it didn't take place.
But we're talking about articles that are talking about whether or not we silenced the board member or not, or attempted to silence.
Did we silence a board member?
No.
Then you're arguing your own argument. You want to know the allegation is we, or myself specifically, bullied and silenced a board member.
No, we're here tonight to discuss whether or not there were articles accusing the board chairman of trying to silence individual board members.
Right.
If we're not going to discuss the substance of that allegation, then I don't believe we have the right to discuss any of it.
We are discussing the substance.
Once you open the door, you open it for the entire issue. You don't just pick and choose what part of this issue we're going to talk about and then stand behind the concept of what took place in executive session, and now we can't talk about it because we talked about it in executive session. If we didn't even have a right to be in executive session to talk about this issue, that doesn't all of a sudden now, because we went into executive session, now deprive us of the right to talk.
Our legal counsel gave us the exemption to go into executive session to discuss that. It was distributed to all board members.
Well, yeah, and here's his quote. Cited a public officer or employee Okay, let me read the closing. Board Chairman Ken Trop, through
No.
Board of Education hired Attorney Richard Mill, cited a public officer or employee evaluation clause within Connecticut open records law as grounds for an executive session meeting. I didn't know, since where in our bylaws do we evaluate other board members?
Under the state statute, Andrew.
Well, I'm talking about our bylaws.
You just read something about the state statute. So if you want to talk about the state
Okay,
statute,
where's
we'll
the
talk
state-
about the state
okay.
statute. I distributed it by email when I distributed it to the press, when we had the meeting, and Bruno from the Waterbury Republican objected to the
Okay.
meeting. And I told him that I would get him the specific statute number
Okay.
and the statute, which was sent to us by Shipman and Goodwin, and I sent to both newspapers, I sent it to Ricky and Bruno, and I CC'd everybody on the board of what that statute was.
Do you have a copy of it for
I'm
our
getting
meeting?
that.
Executive sessions means a meeting of a public agency at which the public is excluded for one or more of the following purposes. A, discussion concerning the appointment, employment, performance, evaluation, health, or dismissal of a public officer or employee, provided such individual may require that discussion be held in an open meeting.
May be held in an open meeting?
Right.
Provided that the person who's going to be discussed has had the opportunity to require that discussion to be held in open session rather than executive session.
And when that became an agenda item, it stated that it was to be an evaluation of a board member?
It
That
said,
was the-
it said, board member conduct, is what it was about.
But it
I'd
didn't
like to call a
state
point
that-
of order.
Well, I guess, the point of order is, how are you tying this into what we're discussing?
Well,
Whether we had or didn't have the executive session is irrelevant to the fact that the registered citizen printed that the board, and me specifically,
if we don't have the
Silence.
executive session, then all we know is that Mr. Marola. No, this is factual. This had nothing to do with executive
we're not going
session.
to talk about Mr. Marola. We are not going to talk about Mr. Marola. Because if the newspaper wants to assume it's Mr. Marola, that's the newspaper's place, Andrew.
Mr. Marola wrote a letter to the newspaper stating he would no longer publish his letters on a
Point of
bi-monthly
order.
That's
basis.
fine.
That's not
Point of
what it's
order.
about.
That's fine. Yes.
To sort of answer where I think Andrew's going, so the last letter that I wrote to the editor was not in reference at all to the executive session, rather the executive committee's meeting with me, which,
Doesn't fall within the executive session exception to secrecy.
Point of order.
Yeah,
This is a
that's-
special meeting.
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is a special meeting to simply discuss our response to the allegations regarding our policies and against our board chair. This has nothing to do with any individual board member.
And you asked at the beginning, Andrew, that the articles be presented that identify the allegations.
Right.
We were given the articles.
Right.
So we are going to talk about the articles, not the Board of Ed meeting from October. That's not part of tonight's discussion.
well, you brought these, and this is one of the articles, Torrington School Board tells members stop sending letters to the editor. That did in fact happen outside of executive session. This is what you're referencing. You gave this to me.
I mean, it's.
I'm not discussing about executive session.
Oh, well, we're not saying that you are.
Okay.
I'm saying Andrew right now is trying to talk
Okay.
about the executive session.
Right, but I mean, if you present this in response to this.
I'm talking about what has become public. I never talk about what's being discussed in executive session, even though being on the board for 5 years, it always seemed amazing that I would always try to keep the secrecy of the executive session meetings, and then 2 days later, 1 day later, reading about what happened in executive session. So don't go that direction. But this is the article. I mean, the article here. I mean, it's quoting you. Traub, who said he spoke with Mr. Marola about the letters before taking the matter to the full board. That has nothing to do with, so when you opened the door by your own statement. Now, unless
Open
this
the
is
door
not
to what?
of talking about Mr. Marola. You're the one who
But I'm not
opened.
talking about the executive session.
I'm not talking about.
You keep saying executive session, you are talking about executive session.
No, because you're saying that my whole discussion is about what happened in executive session.
Okay.
I'm only, because you're saying that I cannot know anything unless I'm talking about something in executive session. And I'm saying the things that I'm talking about are what's being reported in the newspaper. And it's your own quote here. I mean, again, unless you don't agree with that you spoke, Trub, who said he spoke with Mr. Marola, who did you speak to? You spoke to the editor about Mr. Marola?
I spoke to Ricky Campbell.
So you spoke to a newspaper reporter about a board member?
Yeah.
And-
How are you tying that in? You gotta tie this in.
Well, it says accusing the board chair of trying to silence individual board members.
That's
Well,
the accusation.
what?
That's the accusation.
Right, and you're saying, and I'm saying, I'm not going to endorse this letter because I disagree with this, with what you're saying, that the board chairman didn't try to silence a board member. I'm saying, I believe the board chairman did try to silence a board member, and I can discuss it, not because of the executive session, but for whatever reason, it became public in these articles. Once it became public in these articles, I'm not denied the ability to comment on these articles just because we went into executive session and talked about some portion, maybe no portion of it in executive session. Once it becomes public document, public discussion, then I have a right to talk about that. And so now we're talking about, did you try to silence an individual board member, not through executive session, but through your own statement? You had this discussion with Mr. Morrow, and I'm saying, I agree. You tried to silence Mr. Morrow, because that's
Andrew.
why afterwards he sent a letter.
Now that you finally got to that statement,
Okay.
we can answer that statement.
Okay.
Okay? 20 minutes of our lives, but we're there. I met with Mr. Marola after it was requested by a couple of board members that saw the articles, the original article in the Register Citizen.
Okay.
I don't get the Register Citizen. I don't read the Register
Don't
Citizen.
want to comment there. Okay.
And it was brought to my attention about the bylaw violation. It is then my job to talk to a board member about those concerns.
Okay.
So did I sit with him and talk to him about those concerns? Yes, I did.
Okay.
And I went over what the concerns were of the members based on the bylaws that we have.
Right, so this, your discussion with him took place outside of executive session.
My discussion with him took place at Sawyer's Bar.
Okay, so he's not bound by executive session privilege or whatever you would want to call that concept of talking about it, because what he's talking about is a conversation he had with you outside of the executive session meeting, which you clearly have talked about to the press about. So why are we not talking about the substance of what is really going on here? I'm not getting it.
Mr. Chair and fellow board members, I have to apologize. I have a work commitment in Litchfield at 7 that I'm already behind for, but I do, whenever we come to the conclusion, I'll stay behind the board's decision. And I think the point of this is that the clear direction of the articles is engendering the divisiveness that we all have going on right now. So I hope that we'll come to a consensus agreement on the letter and get our position out.
Yes, Chris.
I don't know if this will help Andrew, but here's how I'm looking at it, and maybe it's just we're looking at it in different ways. I think the allegation is one that Ken is individually, the chairman is individually being heavy-handed, that somehow this acting outside of the scope of being the figurehead of the board. And what I'm hearing Ken say is board members brought a concern to him. He had a discussion, because that's his job when there's concern of fellow board members, to discuss with another board member conduct. And that it is therefore not him acting individually on his own agenda to silence an individual but rather in his capacity to investigate at the request of fellow board members. So I think that.
I understand what you're saying.
I think it changes what, I don't know, I can't sustain your objections with that understanding. I don't follow how, if you can appreciate that, then you would see it any other way. I think it's important that we all stand together, so I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, I guess.
Basically,
Vincent
Kent's
had
being
his hand
accused of being,
Vincent had his hand up. I am inadvertently skipped over.
Yeah, that was a while back, but, and I forget what I was gonna say on a point that we were talking about. But, can I ask the board a question that I already know what the chair would say? Because we had a conversation about it. Does
it have to do with does it have to do with the agenda item?
I think it does, because this is specifically the information that you handed us deals specifically with what I'm talking about.
Just asking.
Does the board object to the individual board member's right to exercise their First Amendment right?
it's not on the agenda.
Well, that's not on the agenda, but we're discussing the information that you just handed me, Fiona.
We're just
And that-
discussing allegations made about the board and the chair.
Official position, the board does not object to any person's First Amendment right.
Of course not, and I know how you feel. I know that you're very adamant about that, but I'm curious how other board members feel.
Yeah, if I would truly like to ask, I would like to respectfully ask, and you can accept or deny on your question, that become an item for an upcoming board meeting that will be open and normally posted, so it can be attended instead of in a small group. People have the opportunity to attend that meeting. It's up to you. You can ask the question. I'm just.
I think that's fair, and I think to add to that, I would also like to just generally ask how board members feel, because this said specifically about bullying, and it addressed threats. Somehow the paper got that information about whatever meeting that might have occurred, but I'd be curious to see how each board member feels about making threats to other board members or berating other board members for exercising their First Amendment right. We can have that at another board meeting. But that being said, I think it is unfair for Mr. Traub to take the brunt of the attacks in the paper, because.
It is implied in the paper that I bullied, and I don't believe.
Which I never perceived.
I don't believe that I bullied anyone on the board. I think that, and I have to agree, I think that using the term bullying based on all the attention it has in national media, I think was a sad misuse of terms. That, of implying that, you know, I run through the board with a heavy hand, and that I rule with an iron fist, and I don't, as it said, I don't listen to opinions. I ridicule people that make opinions. I don't believe I do that.
I don't believe you do it either, and I think that's.
So that was the intent of the meeting.
Of having a
Brought to me-
response, yeah, absolutely.
It was brought to me by board members that, I will say thankfully, want to stand up and help support me in this situation because they feel I'm unjustly being accused, and I do thank all of them for that. And, you know, that was basically the intent of the meeting. As far as the substance of other issues that may have led to these articles, as you and I have had many conversations on, that is things that we will have to address as we move forward. I'm looking at bylaws and looking at, you know, and it needs to be vetted in a different, I think, a different venue. I know that it doesn't mean anything, but I do believe that Mr. Marola did take the high road in saying, I'm not going to just continue this. I think it's important that this was a little statement I've written like 6 times, I've shredded it each time, I write it, I rewrite it, I say, oh, you're being an idiot, and you're not, but I'm gonna be Paul for a minute, and I'm just gonna let it go. I think that Mr. Marola, I think that
No, not to me, was it?
That's the whole like manner I
Growing up in Torrington.
I think Mr. Marola took the high road in his letter to the editor. I think that the newspaper and other citizens of Torrington have decided to light a torch under it and carry it. The decision that, in the discussion that Vincent and I did have, was that he was going to work within the democracy of which he believes in. And he was going to try to amend any conflicts in the bylaws from within the system instead of taking it to the streets and making it a brawl. And I personally appreciated that, and I think that the context of it has been seriously misconstrued by the registered citizens and the people that have written letters to the editor to the registered citizen. And I don't personally think that I deserve, as the chair, I deserve the brunt. Throw it on me. I'm the owner of my own business. The buck stops with me there too. I'm used to it. I don't think that Mr. Marola should be made a martyr out of it, but I also don't think that he should get the negative press out of it, and I don't think that the whole situation deserved this level of press when the person involved in it decided that he was going to take a different road. And I think that when the paper took that upon themselves, I think that was a terrible overstatement of the situation. Yes, sir.
As the senior member of this board, as I'm so often reminded,
I'm catching you with gray hair.
as I'm so often reminded, I think it behooves the board to look at this whole problem in a broader context. And I believe that broader context is the issue of the press's right to know what is going on within our school district. And clearly there's a problem there. I believe that problem, I know, again, I know people are bored of hearing this, but I know when I was chairman, I made it my point to open up as many lines of communication with the press as was possible. I was very adamant about having our meetings on Cablevision for that very reason. The public saw us raw. They saw all of our disagreements and bitter deliberations. They saw us for the contentious board that we were. And I welcomed it. To me, that was the democratic process. The point is, we are 10 elected officials who have absolutely zero authority in this town outside of when we are sitting together as 10 members. That is the only time that we have are empowered to do anything related to the public school, our public school district, and bettering the lives of our students. And in that regard, those meetings went long. I tried to keep them focused, but I insisted that they be on television. And I think this board really needs to accelerate its process of making what we do at our meetings more transparent. I know this is an old chestnut. I've been pushing for this, as this board knows, since it was a year ago when I started. It was February when I started putting it on our agendas to get us back on Cablevision live, so that no one believes. We created this environment. We, as a board, created this environment within which the public thinks that there are things going on that no one knows about. And it's partly because of this, of this refusal to make it our meetings more accessible, And if the press is finding that they do not have access to the chairman, if we are to be consistent with the bylaws, the way we're interpreting them, and God knows they are self-contradictory, but the way this board, in a pragmatic manner, has chosen to interpret the bylaws and empower two people to speak with authority of the board. That is number one, the chairman that we elect, and number two, the superintendent that we hire. Then it behooves us to find out if the press feels for some reason they don't have access to that information. And if they don't, then it is our responsibility as a board to remedy that situation immediately. So that the public doesn't think, so the public clearly understands when we say there's things that we can't talk about, they know it's because we are trying to protect the taxpayers from lawsuits. And they believe us and trust that that is exactly why we are doing this.
And the children. Not just the taxpayers, we're trying to protect the
We're
children.
trying to protect the children and the losses that would ensue should that be breached. Yes, absolutely, Ken, absolutely. And then everything else, and then if they do, if we reestablish that trust, then they will understand that there are some things we can't talk about for those exact reasons. And then everything else should be fair game and open to the press, and they should know. And so I think we really need to find a way, Mr. Chairman, to examine this, maybe at our next meeting, about, not here, but at our next public meeting, to literally put it as an agenda item. What can we do better? What can we do better to open up these lines of communication and make our work more transparent? And this didn't begin, for the record, for the press, this didn't begin with Ken Traub. Mark my words, it didn't begin with him. This began well before him, after me, but before him. He inherited this situation, and we've really not taken that bull by the horns and really stepped up to the plate and addressed it, so.
Mr. Chair, can we have a little,
Can John speak?
Go
He's been
ahead.
asking for a little while.
To pick up on something Paul said early in his recent remarks, Board of Ed Raw would be a great title for the renewed televising of our meetings, and you're right, we need to start doing that.
There might be royalties that have to get paid.
Unless you're a McMahon supporter, right?
There might be royalties.
Linda will let us use it.
Linda, yeah, whatever we produce will be fine.
But it would also, one of the reasons that
Maybe
we
she'll
get
do
accused of secrecy is nobody shows up at the subcommittee meetings when everything happens.
There you go.
And so
Excellent
the
point.
public, I shouldn't say nobody, once in a while reporters show up,
And
but
yeah.
not often enough. But what this meeting is about, to quote Dorothy Parker, no good deed goes unpunished. Ken's being a good chairman. He's being a real good chairman, and now he's being punished for some of the things that are maybe unpopular in the process of being a good chairman. That's where I am.
can we take a vote?
Yes, we can. You want to move it to a vote? All right.
We had a
To be clear, the
we
motion
had a
is,
second.
The motion is
I know it was a while ago.
submit this letter in the form of a letter to the editor from the Board of Education to clarify our position on our procedural processes and the allegations against our chair.
All right, that was seconded by Chris. Do you want it read, or do you just want to make the motion and move on?
Just make the motion and move on, everyone
Okay.
has a
All those-
copy.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Show Mr. Marola and Mr. Nargi as opposed. Okay. We only have one thing left. I lost my sheet here. I know it's a long list. Motion to adjourn. Second. Paul, favor? Andrew, are you in favor of adjournment?
I am in favor of that.
Okay, I do support the board.
all right. You're okay with adjournment?
Absolutely.
Okay. Consider it adjourned.